Crowned before birth. Thank you to Brooklinen for sponsoring this video. Anyone who has spent time around a newborn baby knows that while adorable, they are mostly preoccupied with milk, sleep, and soiling themselves, and don't exactly have the skills to govern a nation. Though some may argue that a baby might make a better head of state than a politician. Throughout history, the combination of hereditary monarchy and brutally short life expectancy meant that many rulers did inherit their thrones when they were mere infants. Some were even unfortunate enough to lose their fathers while still in the womb and be born directly onto the throne. In one case, a crown was even placed on the belly of the pregnant queen. And in another, a 3-month-old king wailed through his tedious coronation ceremony. Today, we'll meet 6 rulers who became monarchs before they even took their first breath. Alexander IV, King of Macedonia. Alexander III, aka Alexander the Great, inherited the kingdom of Macedonia when he was 20. He spent the next 13 years conquering Greece, Persia, the Middle East, Egypt, and parts of India. He fell in love with Princess Roxana of Bactria and married her. He also took 2 Persian princesses as wives and had a few male lovers. Alexander amassed the largest empire ever to have existed by that time, but his soldiers were tired and wanted to return home. They rebelled against their king, and he was forced to head back to Greece. Of course, he took the long way around and continued to beat new lands into submission on the way. En route, his lover, Hephaestion, died of a fever. The king was devastated and laid for hours on his corpse. He drowned his sorrows in drink, and at the age of 32, at the height of his power, he died, either from binge drinking or perhaps from wine poisoned by one of his countless enemies. Alexander's first wife, Roxana, was pregnant at the time of his death. She ordered the murders of his second and third wives in order to secure her own child's ascent to the throne. But as no one knew the unborn heir's sex, conflict brewed. The infantry wanted Alexander's half-brother, Philip, to be the next king. He was intellectually disabled, but he was male, while the cavalry wanted to wait to see what was between the newborn baby's legs. In the end, Roxana gave birth to a son. He was named King Alexander IV of Macedonia and ruler of his father's vast empire. But such a massive and diverse land could not be held together without a strong leader. The baby's first regent was assassinated. The second took Alexander and Roxana and retreated to Macedonia, leaving the empire to be ruled by governors who quickly rebelled against the regency. The ringleader, Cassander, conquered Macedonia, executed the regent, and took 6-year-old King Alexander and Roxana as prisoners. Cassander named himself the new regent, but assured the people that Alexander the Great's son would rule the empire when he came of age. But as the boy king approached 14, considered the onset of manhood, Cassander wasn't ready to hand over power. He ordered teenage Alexander and his mother to be poisoned. Without strong leadership, the empire Alexander the Great forged fell apart over the next 150 years, until Macedonia was conquered by the Roman Empire in 148 BCE. A tomb belonging to a teenage king, most likely Alexander IV, was discovered by archaeologists in 1977. Shah II of Iran. Narsi was Shah, or King of Kings of the Empire of Iran, also called the Sasanian Empire. He suffered a devastating defeat against the Romans and was forced to cede much of his empire to them. The loss weakened his dynasty for several generations. Hormizd II was murdered by a group of nobles and Zoroastrian priests. His eldest son, Adurnasi, succeeded him, but within months he too was murdered. His younger brothers had their eyes gouged out and were chased out of the empire. There were no sons left to take the throne. But Hormizd's chief consort, Ifran Hormizd, was pregnant. The murderous nobles reasoned that a baby Shah would be easy to control. So they placed the crown upon the widowed consort's belly. In 383, she gave birth to a son who was named Shah Shapur II. During his childhood, he was easy to control. With nobles competing for the reins of power, the empire was weak and Arab nomads raided frequently. But by 16, Shapur had grown into a strong and ferocious ruler. He led an expedition against the Arabs, massacring several tribes and filling their wells up with sand, leaving survivors to die of thirst in the desert. He rode on into Arabia and Syria, attacking cities and securing the borders of his empire. If his reputation for cruelty wasn't enough, he built a wall along his eastern border. Next, he attacked the Roman Empire. He wanted to regain the territory his great-grandfather had lost. And Roman Emperor Constantine the Great had recently converted to Christianity, of which Shapur was highly distrustful. He adopted harsh religious policies and persecuted those who did not adhere to Zoroastrianism. For decades, Shapur fought with the Romans, eventually killing Emperor Julian in battle and forcing Rome to cede Armenia and Georgia to him. The Shah had a relief of himself created. Under his feet lay the broken body of the Roman emperor. He continued to expand his empire far beyond what his ancestors had controlled. He took over modern-day Afghanistan, Pakistan, and parts of India. He made his empire stronger and larger than it had ever been or would be again. Sasanian Shahs kept harems of thousands of young, beautiful women. Surprisingly, when Shapur II died at the age of 70, his heir was still underage. His brother, Ardashir II, agreed to become Shah until Shapur III came of age. But without Shapur II's strength, the nobility once again grew conniving and murderous. Ardashir II was assassinated. Shapur III was crushed to death when his tent collapsed after nobles cut the ropes supporting it. And so on until the Sasanian Empire fell apart in 651. Through most of history, babies were born at home, often in their mother's bed, and a baby that was about to be crowned monarch was surely delivered in the most luxurious linens available. I just got my Brooklinen Luxe Hardcore Sheet Bundle in the mail, and I am so excited to try it out. Extra pillowcases, duvet cover, very European, core sheet set with flat, fitted, and 2 pillowcases. These feel really buttery soft. Let's put them to bed. These still feel great after a wash, which is a big test for me because much like Henry VIII's laundress, I like to wash my sheets a lot. The quality of my sleep affects my health, mood, and ability to write and produce great history videos. So I'm willing to spend a little more on good quality linens. Luxury hotel caliber sheets can cost up to $500, but Brooklinen's bundles are more reasonable at $200 to $250. The sheets don't just feel good, they look good too. You can mix and match over 20 colors and patterns. That was a great night's sleep. The sheets stayed cool and comfortable all night long. It's like waking up in a luxury hotel on vacation. Right now, Brooklinen is offering my viewers $20 off your purchase of $100 or more. Just click on the link in the description or use promo code HistoryTeaTime to order your luxurious Brooklinen sheet set and enjoy a tranquil night's sleep. And now back to history. King Jean I of France and Navarre. He was the shortest-lived king in French history, but the path leading to and following his short life was paved with scandal. His father, Louis, heir to King Philip IV of France, and Queen Joan I of Navarre, wed his first cousin, Margaret of Burgundy, when they were both 15. The couple had one daughter, Joan, but they did not get along. Margaret had her two best friends at court, her cousins Blanche and Joan, who were married to Louis's younger brothers. Louis's sister, Isabella, Queen of England, noticed that two beautifully embroidered purses she had given to her sisters-in-law were being worn by a pair of brother knights. The knights were spotted entering a tower in Paris, where they were allegedly caught in an act of adultery with Princesses Margaret and Blanche. The knights were tortured into confessions, publicly castrated, flayed alive, tortured on the wheel, and decapitated. Princesses Margaret and Blanche were dressed in rags, had their heads shaved, and were locked away in a dungeon. Prince Louis was eager to move on to a new bride, but a gap in the papacy prevented an annulment for 2 years. His father died and he became King Louis X of France. With only one daughter, Joan, whose legitimacy was now in question, Louis was desperate to remarry. Conveniently, Margaret died in prison at the age of 24. Officially, the cold, damp conditions did her in, but many whispered that she had been strangled. 5 days later, the king married Clementia of Hungary. Louis loved tennis and is history's first named tennis player. In June 1316, after a vigorous match, he chugged a great deal of cold wine. He contracted pneumonia and died at 26. Queen Clementia was 4 months pregnant. If the baby was a girl, then her older sister, Joan, would have the stronger claim to the throne. But if it was a boy, then the newborn would be the unquestioned King of France. What they wouldn't have given for an ultrasound. It was decided that Louis's younger brother, Philip, would be regent until the baby arrived. And on November 15th, 1316, Clementia delivered a baby boy, who was declared King Jean of France and Navarre. Sadly, the baby died on November 20th, at only 5 days old. His tiny coffin was placed in the crypt of the Basilica of Saint-Denis, where he rests with 43 fellow kings of France. Infant mortality was incredibly high in the Middle Ages. About 3 in 10 babies did not reach their first birthday. Jean could have died of sudden infant death syndrome or one of many rampant diseases and infections. But his regent, Prince Philip, was immediately suspected of having done in the vulnerable newborn. Now only one person stood between Philip and the throne. Louis's first child, 4-year-old Joan. He didn't have the little girl murdered. Instead, Philip argued that women should be eliminated from the line of succession, and the Estates General agreed with him, confirming Salic law, which is why France has never had a queen regnant. He thus became King Philip V. The people of Navarre, who had a long history of strong queens, did not share this prejudice. In 1328, they threw off French control and declared Joan their queen. Her descendant, Henry IV, became King of France in 1589 and founded the House of Bourbon, which would go on to rule Spain, Naples, Sicily, Parma, and Luxembourg. 40 years after baby Jean's death, a man came forward claiming to be the long-lost King Jean I. He said that his uncle had swapped him for the corpse of another infant, and that he had been living in Italy the whole time. Some believed his claim, but the next in line to the throne, the future Charles V, didn't want to deal with any rival claims, so he had the man thrown in prison, where he died. Ladislaus the Posthumous. Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund had only one child, a daughter, Elizabeth. At 14, she married Albert, Duke of Austria. Sigismund wanted to pass the empire and the many kingdoms subordinate to it to both Elizabeth and Albert, but the nobility refused to allow a woman to rule. Albert became King of the Romans, King of Bohemia, and King of Hungary and Croatia, while Elizabeth was merely his consort. In the Middle Ages, in order to be Holy Roman Emperor, the man who was elected King of the Romans had to make the treacherous journey to Rome to be crowned by the Pope. But before Albert could set out, he fell ill and died at the age of 42. Elizabeth had given birth to 3 children, 2 daughters, Anne and Elizabeth, and a son, George, who had died hours after birth. But when Albert died, Elizabeth was pregnant. She was convinced that it was a boy, and her physicians, who had no way of knowing, assured her that she was right. Albert made a deathbed will granting all of his kingdoms to his unborn son. But the Hungarian nobles, who were facing a Turkish invasion, wanted an adult king, not a baby. They elected 16-year-old Władysław III of Poland, and they asked the 31-year-old Dowager Queen to marry him. Elizabeth agreed to the betrothal, but she secretly asked her chambermaid to steal the Holy Crown of Hungary for her. She had been denied her father's thrones, but she wasn't going to let her son be denied. The day she was handed the pilfered crown, February 21st, 1440, she went into labor and delivered a baby boy. She named him Ladislas, and he was nicknamed the Posthumous for his arrival after his father's death. Austria acknowledged the baby's right to rule, but appointed Frederick of Habsburg, who had just been elected King of the Romans, as his regent. Władysław of Poland was en route to be crowned King of Hungary. Elizabeth beat him to it and had her 3-month-old son knighted and crowned. The adult-sized diadem was held over his tiny bald head, and he burst into tears while the coronation oath was being read out on his behalf. Once Władysław arrived in Buda, Elizabeth took her son and fled. Civil war between the supporters of the rival kings raged for 2 years. But Elizabeth ran out of money and was forced to sign a peace treaty acknowledging Władysław as king. Heartbroken over the defeat, she died, leaving her 3-year-old son an orphan. The toddler became a ward of Frederick III, King of the Romans. He received an excellent education, and as he entered adolescence, he was poised to take back control of the lands lost to him. Emperor Frederick wanted to keep him under his control, but Austrian knights laid siege to the emperor and forced him to give up the teenage king. Ladislas regained the fealty of many who had abandoned his mother. He was crowned King of Bohemia and became engaged to Magdalena, daughter of King Charles VII of France. Sultan Mehmed II invaded Hungary, and Ladislas fled. Nobleman John Hunyadi stood his ground and pushed the Turks out. Hunyadi died 2 weeks later and handed the many fortresses he had won over to his own son. Once victory had been secured for him, Ladislas returned and tried to force Hunyadi's son to hand over the castles. The son refused, so the king had him executed. Outraged, Hunyadi's family rose up in rebellion against the king, forcing him to flee once more. Just as things were reaching a fever pitch, Ladislas died suddenly at the age of 17. Poison was obviously suspected, but recent examinations of his skeleton suggest that he actually died of either bubonic plague or leukemia. With no contention from Ladislas, his cousin Frederick became the first in a long line of Habsburgs to rule the Holy Roman Empire. William III, Prince of Orange. In 1641, Mary, the 10-year-old daughter of King Charles I of England, was wed to 15-year-old William, the future Prince of Orange. Princess Mary became pregnant at 18, but shortly before the baby was due, her husband William contracted smallpox and died at 24. 8 days later, Mary gave birth to a son. The newborn prince's cradle was draped in black cloth. He inherited the title Prince of Orange from his father, but the offices of stadtholder of the Dutch provinces, to which the prince was traditionally elected, were left vacant. Mary, still a baby herself, showed little interest in her son and left for years at a time to visit her siblings in France and take up with lovers. The young prince was left to be educated by the state. In 1660, Mary's brother was invited to restore the English monarchy as King Charles II. Mary was visiting him when she died of smallpox, leaving 10-year-old William an orphan. She asked her brother to take her son under his wing. His grandmother negotiated to have him named First Noble of Zealand, and the prince had to escape his tutors to receive the honor. He had to ask permission to visit his uncle in London. Charles shared with him a secret plot with the French to invade the Netherlands and make William king, not merely prince and stadtholder. But when the French invaded, William refused to subjugate the Netherlands to them, declaring that he would die defending it in the last ditch. The French retreated, and William won the admiration of his people and was finally elected stadtholder. At 27, he married Mary, the eldest daughter of his English uncle James. The couple got on well but didn't have any children, likely because he was more interested in male romantic companionship. In 1685, King Charles II died without a legitimate heir, and Mary's father became King James II. He outraged his Protestant nation by converting to Catholicism. Both Mary and William had claims to the throne and were Protestant, so Parliament invited them to peacefully invade the nation, chase James out, and become joint king and queen. They did just that in 1689, in what would become known as the Glorious Revolution. James made a bid to regain the crown by raising Catholic troops in Ireland, but William defeated him. William spent much of his time in the Netherlands, so Mary did most of the ruling in England. She died of smallpox at 32. William mourned her deeply. He lived another 8 years and, aside from promoting religious tolerance, pretty much let Parliament rule England. He fell from his horse and broke his collarbone, contracted pneumonia, and died at the age of 51. The throne of England went to Mary's younger sister, Anne, while the title Prince of Orange went to William's next male relative, his cousin, Johann Willem Friso. King Alfonso XIII of Spain. In 1879, after the death of his first wife, King Alfonso XII married his double third cousin, Archduchess Maria Christina of Austria. During their honeymoon, a pastry chef attempted to assassinate the young couple. They had 2 daughters, Maria de la Mercedes and Maria Teresa. In the autumn of 1885, Maria became pregnant for a 3rd time. In November, King Alfonso, who was already suffering from tuberculosis, experienced a flare-up of dysentery. Hit with this double whammy, he died just shy of his 28th birthday. On his deathbed, he assured his pregnant wife that everything would turn out all right, but that she should guarda el coño, or guard her lady parts, and keep the liberal and conservative political parties balanced. The widowed, pregnant queen became regent, and everyone waited to see if she would give birth to a son and the next king, or a daughter, allowing her eldest child, Maria de la Mercedes, to become queen regnant. On May 17, 1886, Maria Cristina gave birth to a bouncing baby boy, King Alfonso XIII. The newborn monarch was presented naked on a silver tray to the prime minister. At 3, Alfonso became seriously ill during a flu pandemic, but recovered. He was given a military education with some political lessons. During his minority, Spain lost Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines following the Spanish-American War. When Alfonso reached the age of 16 in 1902, his majority was marked by bullfights, balls, and festivals throughout Spain. At 19, while on a visit to the United Kingdom, he fell in love with Queen Victoria's granddaughter, Princess Victoria Eugenie of Battenberg, nicknamed Enna. His mother was against the match. Enna was a minor royal, she was Protestant, and her family carried the deadly genetic blood disorder hemophilia. But the young king was in love. They were wed in Madrid on May 31, 1906. While the bride and groom were riding through the streets, waving to the crowds, an anarchist threw a bomb at their carriage. They escaped uninjured, but 24 bystanders and guards were killed and over 100 people were wounded. Enna's wedding dress was splattered with blood. During the circumcision of their first child, Alfonso, the baby bled excessively, and it was clear that the heir to the throne had hemophilia. Alfonso and Enna had 7 children. The oldest and youngest, Gonzalo, both inherited the disease, and both would die young. The king blamed his wife. He was perpetually unfaithful and fathered at least 6 illegitimate children. He also commissioned an extensive collection of early pornographic films. Alfonso had family on both sides of World War I, so Spain remained neutral. His work advocating for prisoners of war earned him a Nobel Peace Prize nomination. In 1918, a flu pandemic swept through war-torn Europe, killing millions. The nations in conflict suppressed news coverage of the outbreak, but neutral Spain did not. Thus it was dubbed the Spanish flu. Alfonso came down with it and nearly died, but recovered. Spain started its own war to keep its last colony, Morocco. The Rif War dragged on for 6 years and divided the country. 13,000 Spanish soldiers were killed at the Battle of Annual, one of Spain's worst defeats in history. The king was informed of the tragedy while vacationing in the south of France. He reportedly remarked, "Chicken meat is cheap," before resuming his golf game. His people turned on him. Soldiers mutinied and protesters burned Spanish flags in the streets. General Miguel Primo de Rivera seized control of the government, and Alfonso supported his dictatorship. But in 1930, Rivera was forced to flee the country. Alfonso was forced to flee as well, but refused to abdicate. In 1936, civil war broke out in Spain. General Francisco Franco emerged as the new dictator. And although Alfonso appealed to him, he refused to reinstate the monarchy. The former king died of a heart attack at age 54 and was buried in Rome in 1941. Franco ordered 3 days of mourning. Because the dictator didn't have a son of his own, he decided to name Alfonso's grandson, Juan Carlos, as his heir. When he died in 1975, Juan Carlos abolished the dictatorship and made Spain a constitutional monarchy. In 2014, he abdicated in favor of his own son, Philippe VI, who is the current king of Spain. Do you enjoy my videos but hate all the looking and blinking? Then check out my new podcast, History Tea Time. The first episode, A History of Royal Incest and Inbreeding, will be launching June 2nd, 2022. Every Thursday, I'll be spilling the tea on history by revisiting and revamping my most popular YouTube videos and adding in even more fascinating information for your listening pleasure. So, next time you want to enjoy a steaming hot cup of history, but need to keep your eyes on work, chores, or the road, check out History Tea Time on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and wherever fine podcasts are enjoyed. Click on the link in the description or use promo code HistoryTeaTime to get $20 off your order of $100 or more of luxurious Brooklinen sheets. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, comment your thoughts, and check out my other royal history videos. If you really want to help, please consider supporting me on Patreon. A link is in the description. Thank you for watching.